Guys, my name's Casey. Today we're going to talk about bones and muscles, and we're going to start with talking about bones. So to do this, we're going to make a bone model, which in the end is going to look like this tube here. So to do this, first I just have a piece of plain paper and I just cut it in half. So this is what it looks like right now. So this is our very first layer of our bone from the outside. So this thick piece of paper is called compact bone. So it's the hardest part of your bone, and it's what you would see if you're looking on the outside of a bone. So let's build more and talk about more what's in the inside of a bone. So our next layer, I'm going to be using painter's tape to just line the paper, but you can use whatever you have on hand, like pipe cleaners, cotton balls, anything really that you want that's a little bit more squishy. So I'm just going to take pieces of this painter tape about this long, and I'm just going to take it on my paper and I'm going to just line the paper, and I'll show you guys what I'm doing. So I just took one piece and I just put it across any way or any material you want, just so that there's a second layer on this first layer of piece of paper. So the second layer I'm making right now, so it's on top of the compact bone, which is our white paper. This is called spongy bone. So spongy bone is directly on top of the compact bone, and it's just like the name says, a little bit spongier. So here is what I just made. I just filled all over our compact bone. Now the second layer, the blue tape, is our spongy bone. So it sits right on top of that compact bone. It's a little bit more squishier, so it gives our bone the ability to be kind of pressed down on a little bit and bounce back. So think of if you press down on a stress ball or a squishy ball and you squeeze it and then you let go and it goes right back into its shape. So that's our second layer of bone. Now let's talk about what's on the inside of a bone. So to do this, I'm going to just use some pink Play-Doh. You can use whatever you have on hand. That's again nice and squishy. And I'm just going to kind of stretch it out to make it a little bit longer and then pull it out a little bit. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to take our paper and we're going to put it right in the middle. And I'm just going to make sure it's all over. Okay. So this pink part in the middle of our bone model, this is called bone marrow. So bone marrow is inside, the very inside of our bones, and it's red in color. Bone marrow is in your long bone. So if you think of the bones in your arm, your humerus right here, if you think of your leg, so in your femur, that's where your thigh bone is. And those are called long bones because they're just really long. And long bones are really important because they have this bone marrow. Now, what is bone marrow? Bone marrow is where all of our cells come from. So all of our cells start from one original cell and then they just kind of split off and they decide what they want to do in the body. And they each do very special, unique things. So the bone marrow is really important so that we have all those cells in our bodies to help us do things every day. So that's the bone marrow. Now we're going to take some yellow Play-Doh or whatever color you have on hand, and we're just going to take that and put it right underneath our bone marrow. So just put it right in the middle, right where you put your bone marrow up here. And this yellow is going to represent our fat. So you have fat normally in some of your long bones and some other bones. It's completely normal to have a little bit of fat in your bones. And what this does, along with our spongy bone layer is just provide us with some cushion. Just like the rest of our body, we need a little bit of fat to provide us cushion in case we fall or in case we get hurt, right? So that it kind of protects our bones from getting broken as easily. So now that we have all of our layers of bone, we're going to roll this up because our bones aren't flat like this piece of paper, right? They're rolled into kind of like cylinders. So how we're going to do that is we're just going to fold one half towards the middle where your bone marrow is, and then we're going to fold the other half. And I'm just going to stick a piece of tape to hold it together. And then you're just going to stick a piece of tape right in the middle. And there you have it. We have our bone. So from the outside, this is what a bone would look like without getting inside the middle of it. So you just see this outside layer, and this is our white thick paper again. So this would be our compact bone, that hard outside layer. And if we flip it, and we're going to look at the inside now, this blue that's right on top of it. It kind of looks like the very same thing, but it's not. They're two layers. This is our spongy bone, remember? It's right on top of that compact bone, and it provides us with a little bit extra bounce back or cushion, like that stress ball we were talking about. And then this pink Play-Doh right here that's in the middle, the very inside the bone, is that really important bone marrow. Now I'm just going to flip our bone so we can see the other side, and this is fat. So this just provides us with an additional layer of cushion. So those are what is inside, or the layers of your bone. There's also really important things like blood vessels and veins that just provide it with some nutrients. But this is a really simple way we can talk about what's on the inside of bones. So now let's talk about some easy ways we can help protect your bones. So drinking enough milk, like when you're a child and you drink milk really often, that's to help build your bones nice and strong, because milk has a lot of calcium and it has a lot of vitamin D in it. And those both help your bone cells form that bone and then make that bone even stronger. So that's why everybody always talks to you about drinking enough milk. If you don't like milk, then you can always take calcium supplements or get calcium from other foods. And you can always go outside. Going outside gives us vitamin D. It's a really nice day out lately here in Toledo, so you can always run around outside, and that also works. It helps you build those strong bones. Another thing we can do is to exercise, because those help strengthen our muscles, in turn which strengthens their connections to our bones. So those are two simple ways we can help protect our bones. Let's talk about what happens when we can't protect them. So if I accidentally fall right into my arm and I hurt my bone in my arm, that's called a fracture. So anytime you break or you hurt part of your bone, that's called a fracture. So if this is our bone and I just put a dent in it like that, that's a fracture because I'm hurting the bone. Now, if you completely break it, that's a fracture too. So in order to do that, most of the time it's when you fall on accident, or if you're playing a sport, and then you would go get seen by a doctor or someone in healthcare, and they would give you an x-ray, and it looks really cool, and you get to see your own bones. And then what they would have to do is put you in a splint. Now let's talk about splinting. Splinting is important because it helps your bone grow back to the way it was before it was ever broken. Because bones are really cool. They grow all day, every day. It's not just the same bone cells you had since the day they were born. They're always building new bone, and then they break down the old bone, and then they build it again. So when you're splinting, what you're doing is, if my hands are the splint, I'm keeping that bone in the straight position that we want it in. Or else, maybe if my hands weren't there, the bone would grow this way when it started to reform after you accidentally hurt yourself and you got a fracture. So that's why we put patients in splints when they get a fracture. That's why it's really important. And also you can get them in cool colors and have people sign your name on them. So they have some fun times too. So those are all about our bones. Now let's move on to muscles. So muscles are made up of something called a myofilament. Fancy term for just something that looks kind of like this pipe cleaner. It's a long little fiber. So this is what makes up all your muscles all over your body. But in each muscle, you have thousands of these, and they're all bundled together, kind of like these pipe cleaners are. So at rest, so right now I'm sitting, so I'm not using any of my leg muscles. So let's talk about what happens. So at rest, say this is my muscle, it's all like elongated out, okay? And then if I were to get up and start walking, I'm using my leg muscles now. What happens when you use your muscle is it actually shortens. So this is my hair tie. Think about this as a muscle, okay? So this is my leg at rest. I'm not moving. I'm sitting. And then I get up and go walk. It's shortening. So that's what's happening to each one of these muscle fibers in this gigantic bundle. So they're all shortening when you move. So they're just going to kind of bend and shorten. So those are basically what happens when you move. Now, there's also two different types of muscles. So let's talk about those. So our red pipe cleaners right here are going to be type 1, and our black pipe cleaners are going to be type 2. So let's talk about type 1 first. So type 1 are red, or they're darker because they have more mitochondria. That means that they just need more energy for whatever it is they need to do. So think about something that needs a lot of energy in your muscles to be able to do it. What about running a marathon or riding a bike for 3 hours? So these guys help us do things that need a lot of muscle strength for long periods of time. So the way I remember it is type 1 is like running a marathon, because I would only ever want to run one marathon, not two. So these are the guys that you would use if you were going on a 5-mile run, if you were swimming for multiple hours, or if you were biking for a really long time. They help us keep moving and stay moving because they are super dark and have all those mitochondria. Now let's compare that to our black fibers, type 2. Now in reality, these guys aren't actually black in our body. It's just what I had on hand at home. But they are lighter than these red guys because these type 2 have less mitochondria, which means they just don't need as much energy to get the job done. So let's think about something that doesn't need as much energy in your muscle. What about lifting weights? So if I'm lifting up a dumbbell in my hand, pretend this is a weight, and then I flex my arm, that took me all of like 1 second, right? Compare that to the 3 hours it would take me and more to complete a whole marathon. So these guys are for short little bursts of movements, like lifting weights, doing a small little sprint, running from your room to the kitchen, whatever you can think of that's really short and quick, that's what these guys help us do. So these are type 2. So again, type 1 is our red and type 2 is our black. So those are some basic things about how muscles are organized and what the terms are for the muscles in our body. So let's think about how do muscles and bones relate to each other, right? Because if I flex my arm, I'm using this muscle, but I'm also moving that bone in my arm, right? So how does that happen? So there's these things called tendons. So tendons connect our muscles to our bones. So I'm going to illustrate this by using just a little bit of Play-Doh, and I'm going to put it on the ends of our muscles and just kind of wrap it all around them. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit, and then I'm just going to attach it to our bone like this. So let's think about how we are able to use our muscles again, okay? So at rest, our muscle fibers are nice and long like these guys. Now let me talk about a situation. So what if I say to myself, hey, I want to move my leg? So then my brain sends down signals to my leg, say, hey, can you contract your muscle? So then the fibers get shorter again, which pulls on this tendon, which then moves this muscle. So that's how each of those correlate. So you have to have the tendon to connect to the bone, or else when you moved these guys, the bone wouldn't move, right? So that's how we use our muscles with our tendons to help move our bones in order to get from point A to point B when we're walking. Because if you didn't move that bone in your leg, you wouldn't really be able to get across the room to the door, right? Now let's talk about some ways we can protect our muscles and our tendons. So our muscles need a lot of things. They need a lot of calcium too, just like our bones. So drinking that milk, taking a calcium supplement, eating yogurt, all those wonderful things help both of our muscles and our bones. You can also use exercise as a way to strengthen those muscles. So any form of exercise, whatever form of exercise you like the most to do, that's the best one for you to do. Whether that be playing soccer or going for a run or lifting weights, they all strengthen your muscles and they all help your muscles grow, which is really important so that we can continue moving wherever we want to go in the world using our legs and arm muscles, and then also moving our bones that are attached to those muscles with our tendons. And you can also lift weights. And some patients, you might hear of a friend who accidentally strained something. So if you ever heard of someone say they strained a muscle, all that means is that they accidentally kind of tore or they bent a little one of those muscle fibers or pipe cleaner or this tendon connecting it to the bone. So they really hurt. And a way to help repair that is to take things like Advil to help reduce inflammation, or icing, or using a heat pad. Either one helps relieve some of that pain and reduce the swelling too, so that your muscle can go back to working the way it was in the first place. You can also have patients that don't have as much muscles in their body. So unfortunately, some patients are also born with problems having enough muscle mass. And that means they just tend to be a little bit weaker and they may not be able to move. So that's why we always need to work on maintaining our muscle strength and keeping ourselves active as we get older. So that's all I have for you guys today about muscles and bones. I hope you guys had fun and learned a little bit today. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to fill out the form below. Thanks, guys.